At 3 a.m. local time on April 5th, 2019, this was Istanbul's main airport, Ataturk International, IATA code IST. By midnight the next day, this was Istanbul's main airport, the aptly named Istanbul Airport. All the while, this airport, also in Istanbul, moved all its operations and equipment roughly a marathon's distance across one of the world's biggest cities in just 45 hours, barely disrupting air traffic into or out of the city in the meantime. Begging the question, how on earth do you take a 64 million passenger per year airport and push it somewhere else? Well, you start by being sick of the airport you have. Prior to the move, Ataturk had been operating for 86 years. It saw 64 million passengers a year more than it was designed for. It had no direction. Turkish President Erdogan believed a new airport would flex Turkey's might to the world, so he pushed for it, along with other flashy, expensive infrastructure projects. Now, whether that was a good idea, whether Turkey could afford the airport's $8 billion cost, that's another debate. Istanbul Airport had officially opened in October of the prior year, with fewer than expected flights transferred from Ataturk. And I do mean tons. I mean 47,360 tons. The big move was postponed, but the move itself from Ataturk was masterfully done. Prepping it took 2 years, over 100 meetings across the government and other stakeholders, 3 logistics firms, and 3 crisis centers set up to respond if anything went wrong. Just to give you a sense of the scale here, the bulk of the move was ground services equipment, aka big stuff. Think baggage carts, boarding steps, pushback tugs, chocks, belt loaders, firefighting trucks, security sensors, I could go on. A total of 10,459 pieces of equipment covering 262 acres were meticulously loaded, carried, tracked, and unpacked from point A to point B in 1,557 vehicles, mostly these big blue container trucks. So many of them, in fact, that if you lined them up end to end, they'd stretch for miles. All those vehicles collectively took a whole airport's operations across the city down the highway, which the police shut down to all other traffic. All the vehicles got searched twice on their way into Istanbul Airport, once at the gate and once in a separate search area. But not everything moved in the truck convoys. Over the course of the move, 188 planes flew from Ataturk to Istanbul Airport, a flight of just a few minutes. All in all, 5,000 people worked on the move, and all of them, and it's sad we even have to say this, survived. As you can imagine, getting this all done with both airports open for at least part of the 45 hours in question demanded some serious scheduling wizardry. After all, when the clock struck midnight to end the transfer period, any plane not where it needed to be was grounded. At 3 a.m. on April 5th, the start of the transfer period, no commercial passenger flights were allowed at Istanbul Airport, only transfer flights to move planes there from across town. At Ataturk, base carriers were still allowed commercial passenger flights, but across both airports, there was a traffic limit of only 70 arrivals and departures per hour. The convoys started driving to Istanbul Airport. 8 hours in, the first transfer flight took off, and the first small convoy made its way on land. By the end of the move, a total of 1,056 trips had been made to and from the new airport to get everything over. At 5 p.m. hour 14, the highway was closed to other traffic, as were alternate routes for the big things. Air traffic, mostly made up of transfer flights, was also on hold. An hour later, the first major convoy arrived at Istanbul Airport. By 7 p.m., they sent Ataturk's last passenger flight bound for Singapore. From this point on, Ataturk was no longer a regular airport, now used only for cargo, state, and other specially permitted non-commercial passenger flights like the rest of the transfers. At 2:59 a.m., Ataturk and Istanbul Airport officially traded IATA codes. Istanbul Airport adopted IST, and Ataturk got ISL. All the while, equipment kept moving and getting unpacked. At 8 a.m. hour 29 of the move, the 188th and final transfer flight from Ataturk to Istanbul Airport landed, and Turkish Airlines and their subsidiaries' move was complete. Just 3 hours later, passengers were at Istanbul Airport waiting for their flights later that day. An hour after that, the other carrier's physical move was done. 3 hours after that, at 2 p.m., Turkish Airlines was allowed to operate commercial passenger flights out of Istanbul Airport. Their first flight 21224 from Istanbul to Ankara with 340 passengers on board departed at 2 p.m. Their exclusivity period ended at 7 p.m. and between then and midnight, other carriers who would base at Istanbul started operating there. When the clock struck midnight, airlines that flew to Ataturk but didn't use it as a base switched their operations to Istanbul Airport. The move was done. For the first week post-move, Ataturk's air traffic was limited to just 10 arrivals or departures per hour, only cargo, maintenance, and private flights. Istanbul Airport's transition lasted a little longer. They were only allowed 70 arrivals and or departures per hour until April 20th, at which point they went up to 80. With the move complete, Istanbul Airport had a capacity of 90 million passengers per year, and by 2023, they were already serving 76 million a year, 12 million more than Ataturk had just before the move.